There's an important new book out, published by Oxford University Press, debating religious liberty and discrimination. And on the one side, the side that we would say would be the left side, or the, quote, progressive side, Professor John Corvino. Met John face to face, had some very cordial interaction with him, had him on the radio. We were supposed to do a debate a couple of years ago on same-sex marriage progress or regress, but had to cancel that. We might do it in the future. So John Corvino takes a side that in many ways I would differ with. John's PhD professor and chair of the philosophy department at Wayne State University. On the other side, the side that I would agree with and be in harmony with, Sherif, Girgis, and Ryan T. Anderson. Ryan is one of the leading conservative thinkers today. You may have seen him on TV debating these very issues. He's the William E. Simon Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. We've sat side by side in panel discussions, and we've had him on the air with us before. So glad to have Ryan back with us today on The Line of Fire. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Sure thing. Happy to be with you.
So, Ryan, if you could explain Professor Corvino's point, is he opens the book speaking about religious liberty, not religious privilege. So the things that we think are fundamental for us as Americans and our religious freedom. So we'd want exemptions from certain laws and things like that. He's looking at as some kind of special privilege. Could you give us his point of view?
Sure. I mean, John's going to want to argue that if the law is a good law, and if it's a good enough law for everyone else, there's no special reason why religious people should get what he calls a get-out-of-the-law free card, playing on the Monopoly get-out-of-jail-free card.
Mm-hmm.
And so John would argue that certain anti-discrimination laws, SOGI laws, adding sexual orientation and gender identity to our anti-discrimination statutes, those are good laws because they prevent harm from being inflicted upon LGBT Americans. And so religious people, when they argue for a religious liberty exemption from those laws, that's more akin to a religious privilege so that they can break the law in a way that other people cannot. And obviously, I mean, the nice thing about the format of this book, a debating book where we go back and forth, is that I disagree with John on both of those points. I don't think SOGI laws are justified, and so I don't think there's a justification for the government to add sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes under our law, nor do I think a religious liberty exemption from those burdensome laws is a form of privilege. If anything, it's a form of privilege to have sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected class. Exempting someone from the burden of that law is not privileging their position. It's merely saying that we're going to protect coexistence and saying that their position won't be penalized.
All right, so let's then look at the SOGI laws themselves. Decades ago, these were not on the books. So you didn't have a law saying you can't discriminate based on sexual orientation. You can't discriminate based on gender identity. Whether someone's born this way or not, we both dispute that. You can't argue with the fact that most people did not decide, hey, I think I want to be gay, or I think I want to be confused about my gender identity. So this is just who the people are. They didn't ask for this. Why shouldn't they be a category just the same as race or ethnicity or gender? Why shouldn't we have laws that specifically protect them from discrimination?
Well, it depends how those laws are crafted. Because what's interesting, you said, decades ago we didn't have these laws. In some jurisdictions we did, but they were interpreted back then and when they were ratified as not to be a law that would punish someone because they believe marriage is the union of a man and a woman. So there were several states that had a SOGI law on the books while continuing to define and to defend marriage properly understood. It's only in light of a reinterpretation of SOGI law in which we now say that believing that marriage is a male-female relationship just is to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. Believing that male is a biological category, not a social or psychological category, just is to discriminate on the basis of gender identity. So the problem here is that these laws are now employing an overly expansive understanding of what counts as discrimination. I'll give you one very clear example about how to think about this. imagine if there was a hospital that said, we won't do chemotherapy for you because you're transgender. To my mind, that would be an unjust form of discrimination on gender identity. They're taking the gender identity of the patient into consideration where it's irrelevant. Right? The gender identity of the cancer patient doesn't matter to the type of cancer treatment that they need. And then they're treating that patient less than equally. That's radically different than a Catholic hospital that says, we won't perform a sex reassignment surgery. And right now, Catholic hospitals are being sued because they have refused to do sex reassignment surgeries. And the lawsuit says they're, quote, discriminating on the basis of gender identity. When these SOGI statutes were passed, no one at the time thought that they would be used to persecute bakers, florists, and photographers who can't celebrate same-sex weddings, that they would be used to shut down Catholic adoption agencies, that they would be used to litigate against Christian hospitals that can't do sex reassignment surgeries. What people thought was that they would protect, a gay customer from being kicked out of a pizza shop just because they're gay.
Right.
Which almost never happened. When was the last time you heard about a business owner who said, I don't serve gay people?
Exactly.
The only cases you hear about are, I don't do gay weddings. And there's a huge difference.
Right. So if you think, for example, of the controversial law or bill in Mississippi, where we're being told, I contrasted an article you wrote giving an accurate overview of it versus the New York Times making it this hate-filled anti-discrimination thing that is going to hurt people. But, for example, it said specifically, someone comes into a hospital, no matter who they are, no matter what their condition, you take care of them. But if they say to a doctor, we want you to perform sex change surgery, that doctor can opt out. So what you're saying then is when these laws were introduced, because religious freedoms were the bedrock of our country, and everyone understood that we had fundamental religious objections to participating in a same-sex, quote, wedding ceremony, or who would have dreamed of it then, forcing a doctor or a hospital to engage in sex change surgery. No one looked at it in that way, and yet ultimately, as I've said for years, those who came out of the closet want to put us in the closet, not universally, but ultimately it's not a matter of equality. When the rubber meets the road, it's really not an issue of equality, is it?
Sure. I mean, I think think of it this way. Simultaneously, the definition of discrimination has grown while an understanding of religious liberty has shrunk. So that these anti-discrimination statutes are now deeming good actions as discriminatory, and religious liberty protections are now being reinterpreted to be merely freedom of worship. And you heard this in the previous administration. The free exercise of religion was regularly redefined as freedom of worship. So the space for religious believers, their protections get smaller, and then the burdens, the government regulations, grow larger and larger. That's what's creating this kind of flashpoint that we're seeing, whether it's the HHS contraception mandate, whether it's transgender surgery, whether it's gay marriage and bakers, florists, and photographers. Those two forces are coming together.
So what do we do just with the sound bites? You've had to deal with this for years now because of the nature of communication these days. When we're told, yeah, you have your freedom of religion, but there's not freedom of consequences. It makes for a good soundbite, but doesn't that fundamentally undercut the meaning of freedom of religion?
Oh, of course. I mean, if the government says, oh, you're free to live out your faith, but then we're free to penalize you because of it, that entirely undercuts the point of the free exercise of religion. As we saw just a week or two ago now with the Trinity Lutheran case, the Supreme Court said 7-2 that if there's a public benefit that this school qualifies for, and you say they're not getting it because they're religious, you are burdening, you are penalizing their free exercise of religion. Because you're saying merely because they are religious, they are not receiving what they otherwise are entitled to under a government benefit program. In this case, it was a safe playground surface, recycled tires. In the same way, if they say, oh, yeah, Green Family, the owners of Hobby Lobby, you're free to run your business how you want to, but if you don't pay for these abortion-causing drugs, we're going to fine you millions of dollars a year. That's not free exercise of religion. That's someone exercising their religion and then being penalized for it. in a gratuitous and unnecessary way.
Exactly. And again, we're not talking about the free exercise of our religion causes us to go seize houses and neighborhoods and burn them down so that there should be penalties for breaking the law. We're simply practicing our faith and yes, being penalized for it. All right, we've got a few more minutes with Ryan Anderson. When we come back on the other side of the break, I want to ask two questions. One, are these debates fruitful? Can we actually change thinking? And two, why is his chapter in the book, major chapter, called Against the New Puritanism? The new book, Debating Religious Liberty and Discrimination.
God of light, hear our cry, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
I'm speaking with Ryan Anderson, one of the leading Christian conservative voices today, together with Sherif Girgis, writing along with Ryan, and Professor John Corvino, who's on the other side of the argument. They have a new book published by Oxford University Press, Debating Religious Liberty and Discrimination. And Ryan, I'm a debater, love to have formal moderated debates in universities and other places like that. So I believe that debates have their place. But when we look at polling, when we look at the opinions of the younger generation, they seem to have turned in so many ways against values that we might have taken for granted in a previous generation. Can this debate be won? Is it just a waste of ink, a waste of words, or can hearts and minds actually be changed? You're on college campuses. You do this face-to-face before secular media. Can we win this battle and turn the tide?
Well, sure. I mean, with God, all things are possible, and there's a role for everyone given his or her vocation. So this won't just be one making intellectual arguments. There's also needs to be a spiritual component, an emotional component, a social media, a mainstream media. I mean, all of this kind of different components to this. It'll be a multi-pronged effort. My contribution is on the intellectual side. And so, we've engaged in an academic written debate that's meant to be accessible to non-academics. So even though it's published by Oxford University Press, the book is written at a level so that, anyone who has a high school or college education could read the book, understand the arguments, and learn from it. And we view our contribution here as I don't think I'm going to persuade kind of the ardent, convinced LGBT activist that he or she is wrong and that I'm right. But I think I can weaken the resolve of that person in thinking that I'm stupid and evil and must be punished. So part of the reason of this is to help the people who are on the far other side of the spectrum, the far left side of the spectrum, to say, actually, wait, religious conservatives, they're not the reincarnation of the KKK. The Westboro Baptist Church doesn't speak for all Southern Baptists, and there's a good argument to be made that people who believe what the church has always taught about marriage, that it's the union of husband and wife, shouldn't be penalized in American law. That's one audience. Another audience are the people on our side of the debate. We need to help them better understand the issues, better articulate the argument. They're going to be having these conversations at PTA meetings, at Little League practices, at the water cooler, in the dorm room with their college friends. We need to be able to help educate our own people on how to think about and talk about these issues. And then third audience, there are people who are undecided on this issue. People who personally were in favor of gay marriage, but they're also in favor of the freedom of the baker. Right? There's a contingent of people who thought, look, gay people should be able to get married, but conservative religious people shouldn't have to give up their beliefs either. And so we can persuade people in the middle to say, on these religious liberty debates, we're not the ones imposing our values on others. We're responding to what Sherif and I call the new Puritanism. The new Puritans in the United States are people saying, because we're in favor of contraception, you have to pay for it. Because we're in favor of abortion, you have to cover it on your health insurance. And because we're in favor of gay marriage, you have to bake us a gay wedding cake. That's the new form of Puritanism that we see. And so persuadable people in this debate can be won to our side of the debate.
Yeah, and the three reasons you articulated for debating, 100% with you in terms of that. And first and foremost, we articulate things for those who agree, and now they're fortified and strengthened because they're under constant bombardment. And Ryan, I'm on the front lines of this day and night, not by choosing, but by calling. And yet there are many times where there are nuances of things. I'm looking for, okay, how do I articulate this? What are the real arguments? And I'll look at what you've put out and think, perfect, this is what I'll share. I don't need to write my article. You've said it. So you're helping many. And yes, I believe with God's help, the tide will turn with folks like you doing your part. So thanks so much for the hard work and the effort and even crafting it as the new Puritanism. I think that's a brilliant move. So may God bless your efforts.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.